welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ambrose McNevin from Computer Business Review. So it is our pleasure to have Kimball Applications with us today, who will be discussing adopting best practice processes to catalyze your growth and increase the value of services within a technology business. And I'm delighted to have as today's guest speakers Shane Anastasi, who is VP Salesforce Alliance at Kimball and founder of PS Principles, and Mark Robinson, Kimball co-founder and CMO, who will take part in the Q&A at the end of the presentation. So, gentlemen, welcome. Over to you.
It's a pleasure to be here today, and thanks to everybody for spending the time out of your busy schedules to listen to this presentation. So we'll start with really just what we're going to cover today. We're going to break it up into three fairly easy sections. We're going to focus on the subtle differences that are created with respect to professional services organizations, PSOs, within technology firms, and then look at the impact of these differences on our mission and strategy, which is important for us to make sure that we're heading in the right direction with our organizations. And then finally, we're going to cover a lot of topics that we could consider as ways to build high-performance teams. And we want to cover a lot of topics because the objective of this presentation is to give you ideas of areas where you could be making changes or investigating the performance of your own business. So I apologize if at certain points we don't dive deep into some of these issues, but really the objective of this call is to cover as many as possible to give you ideas of what you could be doing next. So to begin with, let's look at the comparison of the different types of PSOs. And really there are two main types, which are pure play professional services organizations, which are those that really just provide services to customers and services alone. Everybody in the company is either billable or focused on getting people billable. Embedded PSOs, however, which we call ESOs, are actually those that work inside of a product company, either technology or software or hardware or something like that. And I've actually spent a good part of my life working for the latter half, but I started working at IBM at a time where IBM was still very much just a product company, and we had to form a belief and a mission and a strategy that helped us work with the product company. And there's subtle differences in how it changes your mindset as a service provider. And I don't want to go through every one of these points, but the key ones here are essentially when you begin to work as a professional services organization inside of a product company, the subtle shifts are that you've got to start commoditizing your own service as a way to make it faster so that the product can have more value to the customer faster. You're not worried about how much margin you can eke out of every single deal. And while margin is still something you need to be aware of, you're not trying to return necessarily as much money as possible back to the business, because what you're after is product growth. That then plays into how you manage your backlog, because too much backlog means that you can't get to your new customers fast enough. And you really have to find a way to build a healthy and productive partner ecosystem where you can share the workload, which is totally opposite to what you would do in a pure play situation. Also, you've got to become a product advocate when you're an ESO, whereas as a PSO, you sometimes remain product independent so that you can advise your customers of all the things that are available in the market. Now, you probably know all of these already, but just reviewing exactly the position that you're in, if you're working on any of these situations on the left-hand side here, then you're probably holding back something that is holding your organization back from a perspective of being a high-performance team. If you can move any of those focuses that you're currently working on from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, then you will begin to open up avenues for you to improve your service and help your company grow and scale in the future. So, there's my point. So what does that actually mean to our mission, right? So how does being in the right-hand column, an ESO, change the mission of our organization? Well, it depends, and it depends now on the maturity of the company which embeds us. Something that we're not always 100% in tune with is that depending on the stage of the growth of the company that we're in, that will dictate to us how we should act as a professional services organization. And again, I don't want to read through every single one of these, but as an example, as a startup, we need to be out in the field making the product work. The product is immature and it needs our help in the field. And essentially, we're doing field engineering. We're taking the product and we're changing it on the fly to make this customer successful and not to lose them, and to bring in that first inkling of revenue that we've got from the product sale. And then as we mature, we go all through all these different stages, which at the end becomes kind of rampant growth, where the company is really, hitting its strides, and we need to walk in now and we need to find a way to keep up with that work. We need to build a channel so that other partners can continue to proliferate the product, but we also need to stamp our authority as the experts so that we remain involved and that we provide quality assurance over what the partners are doing. And at all costs, we must scale, and we're going to talk about scale a little bit today and what I call the 3 dimensions of scale. But really, the general point here is that we have to align with the maturity of our organization. So when you look at this, and can you identify the maturity of the company that you work in today? And if you can, then you can begin to identify some of the things that you should be prioritizing. So what else affects our mission? Just aligning with the company isn't the only thing that we need to consider. Another thing we need to consider is our own maturity. Every professional services organization needs to move and continue its own growth, because if it doesn't, then it begins to lose people and it begins to stagnate. Now, there are many, many different ways to do this, and I'm referencing the professional services maturity model that is published by Service Performance Insights. You can't read it because, unfortunately, the text is a little bit garbled here, but there's too much detail here for you to look at. The key thing is that this does exist, and finding out exactly where you are today and where you want to move your team towards is going to help you to define your mission. And I've used this in almost every professional services executive job that I've had, and it's an amazing tool to communicate not just to the consultants, but also to the rest of the company what it is that you're trying to do with the professional services organization. And by maturing the organization at the same rate as the rest of the company is maturing, you stay lockstep with helping that company do the things it needs to do without getting caught left behind. And believe me, if you get caught behind the rest of the company, that's when the pressure begins to mount on the services executive to find ways to catch up. Another area of maturity that we need to consider is really our customers' maturity. And the reason we think about the customer's maturity is because as they mature in the use of our products, their needs will continue to grow, and that gives us an opportunity to provide them services that meet with those needs. Now, I've done this before a number of times, and here's an example from something we built at Badgeville, which is really a gamification company. But really, when a company begins in gamification, they don't truly understand how that can be used to create behavior change within an organization. And so we built out a maturity model that allowed us as professional services to guide them through each of these stages. And we actually had products that aligned with everything post the purchase. Obviously, we had implementation for level 2, but then we also outsourced and provided outsourced administrative functions as well as analyst experts through levels 3 and 4, and then even got as far as kind of training people to be certified within the kind of field of behavior psychology and gamification all the way up through level 5. The point being, the customer's needs as they grow with your product will begin to open up opportunities for you to provide them service and make money, as well as increase the efficiency and the value they get from your product. So if we take all of that into consideration, how do you actually build an effective mission? Well, once you've got your mission and you've aligned it with everybody around you, the first thing that you've got to do is go and get sales buy-in. One of the things that occurs that we often kind of joke about within the industry is that kind of sales services relationship and how we have the promise makers and the promise keepers. Now, this can be quite a difficult relationship if you let it get that way. One of the things we have to practice as professional services executives inside of embedded organizations is kind of fostering that relationship with sales. One way to do that is to just make sure that you're aligned. One of the things that professional services must be clear about inside of a product company is that it's your expertise that's the market differentiator. And you have to work with sales to find a way to bring that market expertise into the sales cycle. I recently sent a deck to a friend of mine who I'm working with, who's a PS executive for a software company, and we talked about the issues that he was having with the sales or the head of sales. And so we looked at this deck that I had from another job, and really it provided him with guidance as a way to go in and pitch his professional services to the salesperson or to the head of sales that resonated with them. Use my people to help close deals in these situations. Let my team build the trust with the customer so that the customer thinks that there is absolutely no other place to go than with us, because we're the people that will actually guide them through their journey from wanting to do something with the product to actually achieving it. And if you can bring that expertise to the customer as a part of the pre-sale cycle, you'll simply close more deals. There's no doubt about it. The other thing that professional services has to focus on is getting customers live faster. Speed to value inside of an embedded services organization is probably the key metric with respect to business success. We've got to make customers happy, and the happier we make customers, the more software product they buy. And so it's very, very important that we focus on that and aligning the sales on how we're going to do that. Get vocal buy-in from the head of sales as well as the CEO and the CFO as to what it is that services is going to do on the sales side. I think this is very important because if you don't get kind of vocal buy-in from the rest of the company, your team just listens to you and they feel that they're isolated from what happens outside of the services organization. It's very important to have you and the rest of the executives in the company spruiking exactly the same message about how important services is in the sale and the acquisition of new customers. Ideally, if you can, you should also share KPIs and align compensation. This can be hard to do. I know that the services guys executive is not always incorporated into the establishment of sales compensation strategies, but where you can, you should make sure that, selling services is important, that you have a target attach rate, that you have some idea of how much services you should be selling with every product deal. And it must be reciprocal, right? So one of the things about working with sales is that we can't just let them kind of hand us these water mines that blow up in our face once they come over. And, I'm kind of, being joking about that. I teach this to consultants that really at the end of the day, when you walk into project kickoff, if you haven't done your work, you have no idea what's going to happen because you don't understand the entire sales process that happened before you got there. And I think that it's very reasonable for us as professional services organizations to ask that of the product group or the sales group of a product company. If we're going to help you be the differentiator and we're going to help you go and close deals, these are the things that I'm asking for in return, right? I want to get customers live, so I need you to help me understand exactly what's being committed during the sales process. I need you to participate in a sales to services handover that goes through a specific list of questions that puts us in the picture before we even step in front of the customer. Because the more we get blindsided, the more likely it is that this project is going to end up in disaster, and then the product never gets used by the customer. And the number one thing that all product companies need to be aware of is the failure to adopt the first sale of a product. Because if that product never gets used or adopted, then you've pretty much lost that customer forever. The other thing that we can ask for is also just a cap on pre-sales. Rather than, hey, use and abuse my guys, let's agree how much time I'll put aside, and we'll work to that month to month or quarter to quarter. I've always found that that's a moving target, but at least having that cap and that agreement that there's a certain amount of time that you're willing to put towards pre-sales is actually much appreciated from the services executive. And if you didn't quite get the nuance of what I've pitched here in the last two slides, what I am saying is I think it's great for the professional services executive to be the one that takes the first step, to be the one that kind of reaches out across the aisle and says, hey, look, we have to work together better because if we can find a way to do that, our company is going to be much better off. And I've got some strategies for doing that, and we'll talk about that next. I'm waiting for the slide. There we go. So, but don't make it mission impossible, right? You've got to teach your guys how or what to expect with respect to project kickoffs and post-sale activities. One of the things that I've learned over my time is that having consultants sit around and complain and moan about the fact that sales guys don't know what they're doing and they set us up for failure and they just throw stuff over the fence, it's such an unproductive approach. And there's this thing in psychology called a locus of control. And a locus of control means what are the influences that I believe dictate my future? And having an external locus of control means that I believe what everybody else does impacts my ability to be successful. And you've got to teach consultants to stop thinking that way. One, because we're never going to change the sales cycle. There are so many inherent things that are dangerous about our sales cycle, but it's the best process we have. So sitting around trying to complain about it is never going to work. It's never going to improve it, and it's never going to be perfect. So what we have to do is have an internal locus of control, which is what am I going to do about it? And there are so many things that you can teach consultants to do about the fact that many of these time bombs exist when they start a project, that they're much better off learning and mastering those techniques than they are sitting around complaining about the flaws that they can't adjust or that they can't do anything about. So this is exactly what my training in the 7 principles of professional services was targeted at, because I've been doing this for years and training consultants to stop kind of complaining about what they can't control and really take their own destiny in their own hands. Walk into a kickoff knowing that there's going to be misalignments, knowing and learning how to spot a misalignment and how to then realign it on the fly without creating a massive expectation. And at the end, a massive escalation. And so, at some point, things are going to escalate, but by giving your team more empowerment and more ability to realign things on the fly means that you'll have a smoother kickoff and you'll have smoother projects that waste less of your time in escalations. All right, so we've covered the first 2 sections around what it means to be an ESO, as well as how being an ESO or PSO inside of an embedded company, how that alters our mission and our strategy. What I want to talk about briefly now is a few areas that we can investigate that would help us build high-performance teams in this situation. The first is, don't get distracted by too many metrics. I know even today we talk about being data-driven and we talk about the power of analytics, but there are only so many levers in a professional services organization that you can truly use on the fly in a quarter or even in a quarter before the quarter that will really impact how your business will perform. And so I do urge people to focus on a core set of metrics. I have a core set here that you'll see, and I always use the balanced scorecard type approach of identifying both lagging and leading indicators so that you know some metrics that you read, they're kind of done. You can't do anything about. The bookings that you've taken in the previous quarter, they're done. You can't increase last quarter's booking numbers. What you can do, though, is you can look at the leading indicator, which is your backlog. What am I going to do about that backlog? Do I know how much of my backlog is actually addressable? And we used to have a metric that was based off of backlog called addressable backlog, because what happens with backlog is it grows and more projects are there, but then projects don't always reach their natural conclusion as they're kind of stated within statements of work. And so you can find that although you might have 10,000 hours of backlog, that only 8,000 of those hours are actually addressable. So understanding your data is really, really important, but it's also important not to get too distracted by them. Ask yourself, what am I truly going to do with respect to this data? Like, what action am I going to take from it? And if you can't determine that within like a few seconds, then it's probably not a metric that you need to be worried about. The fewer metrics you can boil this down to, the easier you can make your own decision making, and also the clearer you can be in the actions that you take. One of the things that I'm very keen to do whenever I work as a professional services executive and I'm presenting metrics is to make sure that my board and my CEO and everybody else knows that I take action on the metrics, right? So have an action plan that not only picks up on a metric, but is aimed at changing that metric month over month or quarter over quarter, and track that. And that way you do present yourself as being a highly kind of principled executive who is focused on getting results and changing the environment in which they work. The other way to look at data is that data that we have that isn't provided to the field is somewhat useless, right? The whole point of collecting data in professional services environments should be for the dissemination and the use of it in the field. And so if you're collecting data and not sending it out to the field, then really you're not empowering them to use it. And so some examples of that would be, providing project managers with real-time time card analysis. Okay, who has put time in? Are we hitting our forecasted number of hours for the week, or are we behind? If I wanted my team to be billing on average 30 hours this week of billable time to the project and it's coming in at 28, I'd like to know that in advance, because I don't get to see that when I'm just approving an individual time card. One time card might be off, but I need to be looking at the whole picture to see whether or not I'm hitting my forecasted number. And so as those time cards come in, I want to be able to have that view so that I can take action and ask people to resubmit time cards if necessary. The other way that you can use real-time information in projects is through giving consultants access to real-time project assignments, as well as giving them time card guidance. And the reason I have Kimball up here is that is one of the things that we do, where we provide the consultants with the forecasted hours that we believe that they were meant to work this week. And by doing that and using this information in real time, we actually drastically reduce revenue leak. And revenue leak is actually something I talk and teach consultants about, which is that if your company thinks you're going to bill 38 hours of billable work this week, as soon as you drop 1 or 2 hours from that, you begin to leak revenue that can impact whether or not your team makes its number or not. And so what Kimball does, Kimball takes that information in real time and puts it on the consultant's time card. And by doing that, you can drastically reduce the amount of revenue you lose on a weekly basis. And believe me, I don't think I've ever worked in an organization where I didn't suffer some element of revenue leakage. The other thing that we teach as the 7 principles of professional services, and I teach in the trainings for consultants, is really mastering your ability to be the expert of your subject matter. And when you do this, right, when you truly master and become the expert, there are a lot of things that happen that you will find you can use to improve the performance of your organization. The first is that you can begin to prescribe success to the customer. And what I mean by prescribing success is that when a customer wants to make a decision that goes against either your ability to make them successful in the future or your ability to finish the project on time, you do have a lot of power to say to the customer, look, I recommend that we don't take this approach. And in my book, I've actually written about a specific situation where we did this with respect to trying to avoid a product pitfall. While the team were kind of loosely adopting this concept of prescribing success, we were unable to change customers' minds until we decided that after a few weeks or months of it, we weren't making any progress. We decided to really take it seriously, and we created an entire escalation process around the recommendation of customers away from this particular product function. And by having this process and making it clear to the consultants that they were empowered to tell the customer, look, we're strongly recommending that you don't do this. If you do decide that you want to do it, you have to talk to my manager because we need to make sure that you're actually taking on the risk of the potential outcome that this action could cause. And if you break that down, what we're doing and what we're using as a tool is the transference and quantification of risk. I'm taking the risk of taking this bad action and this direction for the project, and I'm transferring it to the customer because I'm the expert, and my job is to make sure that I manage that risk. And so if you're not going to listen to me, I'm going to make you own that risk. And in doing that, you create this massive shift that most customers actually recoil from, which is, I don't want to go against the advice of the expert. When I go to a doctor, I like to take their advice. We don't take that same kind of approach to our consulting enough in the professional services field. And so the more that you can become the expert within your engagements, and the more that you can bring your knowledge and your collective wisdom to the forefront, the more power you have to prescribe success. And I got to say, if there is any doubt that you don't believe this, you honestly should try it. It's truly, in my thinking, the greatest single weapon that any consultant has available to them whilst out in the field on a project. Next, I want to talk about scale. Scale is a very complex topic, and I don't want to get bogged down in slides trying to describe it. But I do want to make a couple of kind of very basic points about scale. I see scale in a very specific way, and there are lots of definitions for it, so I'm sure lots of different people will have different thoughts. But I see scale as being the ability to cover the increased need in demand whilst still using my existing resources to cover that increase before I've had a chance to build out the rest of the organization to compensate. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but really my view of scale is making sure that my organization is set up so that it can buy me time to make the changes that I need to make in order to cope with and get ahead of the increased demand. And I see that there is three components of this, and I call them people, which is really being able to ramp people up fast so that I can get them onto a particular job quickly as demand increases for that particular person or that particular product. Being able to increase the average tenure of my group, because you can't be successful at scaling if your average tenure is dropping. And so you've got to keep your experienced people, because they're the people that lead the rest of the organization into new areas. You've also, to do that, you've got to provide ongoing career growth. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But you definitely have to have something that your people are looking forward to, and you can do that in a number of different ways. Another thing we have to look at is product. And when I talk about product, I'm talking about our services offerings, right? And what we need to look at is what products can we bring to market that help our customer maturity cycle? Like, what are the things that our customers are now doing with our product that we could help them with, right? What are their needs as they mature in their use of our products? What can we offer to them as service providers to help them make better use of it? In doing so, what we create is we create multiple avenues of revenue. And when you have multiple avenues of revenue within professional services, you can begin to leverage that revenue by shifting your targets around mid-quarter based on where the work is. And I don't know about you, but in any form where I've had multiple revenue streams, I've been able to use that to hit my revenue numbers more successfully by making sure that I'm attuned to the demand and supply of each of those revenue streams. And although I might begin a quarter saying that I kind of know what the revenue split is going to be between those revenue streams, I'm always adjusting it all the way through the quarter to make sure that I hit my number. And it usually ends up being totally different at the end of the quarter than what I really thought it was going to be at the start. But if you only have one single line of revenue, you don't have that capability. And so I'm urging you, if you have the opportunity to find that within your services organization, then you should look for it. You should also align the product, if possible, with the career growth and maturity of your people. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute. But essentially, if you can make sure that as your people mature through your organization, that their future outlook has them targeted on growing into one of the other product lines, then you begin to it's like giving them a constant carrot. Right? You begin to keep people longer because they know exactly what their career path is going to be in this organization. There's nothing worse than just having a PS org that just does implementations, and then all of a sudden an architect who's been there for 2 or 3 years starts to say, I don't know what I'm going to do next, right? I'm not going to be a project manager. I really don't think that there's anywhere for me to grow, and then they begin to leave. And having architects and really senior people like that leave ESOs is a really dangerous thing, because they're really the people that make up, that have the hold up the backbone of our ability to make customers successful. And then, of course, the last thing is process, right? We have to mature like we talked about in the maturity slide. We have to improve our methodology. We have to reuse our IP, but to collect it first and then reuse it. But then we also have to make sure that we're increasing our operational maturity as a whole. And in doing so, what we're doing is we're creating slack in our current operating system or model so that we can continue to handle more and more things. And so every time we improve a methodology or we find a way to reuse IP, we're creating a little bit of space for the organization to scale into. So what's important here, right, is that in order to scale correctly, if you take my definition before as being the ability to kind of cover the additional demand while you build out and make the changes you need to catch up and surpass it, really what scale means is it means the ability to flex. And I'm going to show you what a fully kind of flexed model looked like in a job that I've had before. So if you look at these two columns, it's important to look at the product is the blue things on the left-hand side, and my people and their tenure within the organization is on the right-hand side. And so if I start with the people, you can see that we bring them in with clear hiring objectives and we give them intensive onboarding. But then we move them up from the learning resources who have been there a very short amount of time, and we put them on lower risk services. Then as they become more mature, we move them up into a medium risk service. And then finally, once they are mature, we move them into our higher risk service. And if you look at what that correlates to, it correlates to support services for the lower risk guys. We put them into kind of what we call L1 support roles. And not that there aren't mature roles for people inside of support. But what this gives them is the ability to either go deeper into the support model or to progress into another product line called administrative services. And admin services was a service we offered to customers that really required a mid-level resource. Now, instead of having to create a situation where I took people out of support and put them onto implementations, I didn't have to do that anymore. I actually took people out of support and put them into admin services. And then when I needed people in the implementation services, when my demand got higher than what my capacity was, I had the ability to pull them out of admin services instead of having to pull them out of support. Now, what this does is it creates flex, right? It creates a more gradual scale of improved level of service to my customer that matches my increased level of capability from my employees. And so this is the first level of alignment that creates some flex. The second level, or the third dimension, is then layering things like methodology and where we get our resources from across these offerings. And so I call this process leverage. The better we get at our methodology, the more efficient we become at delivering them. The better we get at actually moving work between onshore, offshore, and subcontractors, the better we are at creating what I call margin leverage. So if I know the kind of numbers that I need to hit, and I know where my revenue is going to get to, and I have a particular margin target, if I have a well-established onshore, offshore, and subcontractor model, then I can move the work around to try and make sure that I get as close as possible to my margin number. Now, we all know that when you do that, it's not like there isn't a trade-off. There is a lot of issue sometimes between giving work to partners or giving work to the offshore consultants. But that's another area of expertise where we've got to get better at kind of lifting their level of quality as well, and there are tactics for doing that. But essentially, this is just taking a look at the ability to create margin leverage by moving the work between the different pillars of people types so that you can hit the right number of margin. Now, this wasn't aimed to be overly too complex, but it is a complex topic, so I appreciate you sitting through it. By doing this and by moving the kind of the process leverage across the product, we do create flex to move that, as we talked about with margin. If there's any questions about this, this is something that does require a lot longer to really get into the detail of, but I hope that it gives you some thought of the ways that you could look at your own business. Another area that we can continue to work on in order to create high performance is really working on our relationship with sales and really kind of amping it up to the next level. And one of the ways that I do that when I work with services organizations is I actually get them and sales to sit down in a room together and we walk a mile in each other's shoes. What's often interesting is, services consultants don't truly understand how hard it is to sell, right, and to live off of your next deal. And then the reality is that nobody in sales knows anything about professional services. So you've got to educate them, right? You've got to explain to them how margin works, like how you can't hire any more people until you begin to make money that will cover the investment you need in those people. And so you have to teach the sales, not just the head of sales, but the sales team about how to use professional services as a weapon, but also how to help you grow so that you guys can stay lockstep. And one of the big things that I found is you just got to keep a sense of humor. There's going to be a lot of push and pull in this situation, and I think that if we take it too seriously, it can begin to kind of bog us down rather than just stepping back from it and realizing that this is just a part of the kind of sales services relationship and making sure that you can kind of keep a little bit of humor about it. And if you can read the slide there, it says, before you criticize someone, you should walk a mile in their shoes. That way, when you criticize them, you're a mile away from them and you have their shoes. But it is something to kind of work within when we talk about building that sales services relationship. You've got to keep a good sense of humor because it can get quite aggravated. One thing then is really just to go a mile more and really, if you walk that extra mile, it truly is usually never crowded, right? And it really does differentiate you as an upstanding services executive. One way that we do that is share systems to avoid surprises, right? The more that you can make your capacity availability open to the sales team, the better. The more that they can give you visibility into the services pipeline, the better. And if you don't have your own services sales guys, then really you're reliant on the sales team to give you that visibility. Don't reward fire starters. One of the big things that I learned working for an equity firm was that, if you reward firefighters, then essentially you're breeding arsonists. And so what you have to do is make sure that you don't reward those guys. You've got to weed them out, and you've got to reward the guys who truly are doing the right behavior. Get delivery teams involved in pre-sales process. If you can, the earlier, the better, without creating too much of a drag on your own P&L and your own margin. Mandate that sales do the sales to services handover. Help them understand what you need out of that process. And then celebrate your involvement in closing deals. This is something that we don't do a lot of within professional services, is making sure that we, when the deal gets closed, that services gets the true recognition that it deserves. And that's something you should work with your head of sales on, as well as your CEO. Also ensure compensation packages drive appropriate behavior where possible. But like we said before, you don't always get input into that, but it is good if you can do it. I want to talk briefly also about recognition. Recognition, again, is a complex topic, but I want to talk about something specific that we kind of misunderstand sometimes in the professional services world. We all have recognition programs, and we all like to recognize our consultants, but one of the reasons that I wrote the 7 principles of professional services is that I learned something very valuable, which was, in the world of professional services, we like to reward our consultants at the end of projects. And by doing that, we actually break this thing called the habit loop. And the habit loop works on a trigger or an action that somebody does that causes them to act in a certain way, to behave a certain way. And when you reward that behavior, and when you reward it quickly and as close to the behavior as you can, you're reinforcing the fact that they should act that way, and you begin a cycle of creating a habit. Within professional services, if you take a look at how we typically do this, if we wait until the end of a project to create recognition, then the consultant doesn't know what specific behavior we're recognizing or rewarding. And by doing that, we're essentially breaking the habit loop. And so I urge you to look at how you're doing recognition. I actually had a call on this morning with a customer for PS Principles, where we're going to change the way that they recognize their consultants, because they've been waiting either until the end of the project or by recognizing 1 or 2 individuals at the end of a month. And when you break this up, there's absolutely no way that a program like that is going to bring about significant behavior change. And if that's what you're trying to do with your organization, and you're trying to find a way to get your consultants to be more effective in the field, then you have to have a process of as close to immediate recognition as possible. And so when you see the behaviors in the field, you have to recognize them. And I'll recommend 2 books. One is called, 2 books by Partners in Leadership. It's called, the first is The Oz Principle, and the second is Change the Culture, Change the Game. And these guys really kind of, with another guy, Daniel Mizek, really kind of pioneered the results pyramid, which is definitely worth looking at, because it does kind of explain to you why this recognition works and how important it is to changing behavior and obtaining better business results. But just from this perspective, this is just don't wait till the end of a project. Hand out recognition as often and as immediate as you can, and also ask your direct line managers to do that as well. Ways that you can do that are, make sure that you're clear on identifying the behaviors that should be rewarded. This is why I wrote the 7 Principles of Professional Services, to create a framework that people knew were the right behaviors on projects. I feel like when consultants are out in the field, they're somewhat lost without a field guide. And so if you can align your recognition around the right behaviors, then it gives you that added value of always reinforcing the same behaviors. And then, of course, it begins to take on a result faster. You'll see the results much quicker. You've got to recognize people within days of the event happening. To be honest, I prefer hours, but you probably have a day or 2. You need to align recognition with also the way that you review people with their performance reviews, as well as how you look at their career development. Ways you can do this with the extended team is make sure that you recognize non-PS people that have behaved the right way. We don't often do that enough either. We also don't celebrate the PS role in the winning of new deals like we talked about before, but we also often don't celebrate our go-lives. One of the things we started at Badgeville was actually using the sales gong for every time that a professional services project went live. And this was awesome for the consultants, because the lead consultant on each of the deals got to go and bang the gong just like a sales guy did, and everybody would stand around and clap. So they got their moment in the sun, but it just recognized that without services getting projects live, that the product sale is only half done. And I think that that's really, really important. And that, we as executives, we have to step up and be our team's most visible cheerleaders. If we're not doing that, then it's actually demoralizing for our team. So if you can find a way to be more vocal and support your team more in front of the company, then obviously your team is going to enjoy that, and they're going to be recognized, and they're going to begin to or continue to do the behaviors that you want them to do. All right, last slide. Really just avoid the common pitfalls, right? There's all these other little things around the edges that we know we have to do that sometimes we don't. Lack of clarity of the professional services role in the business is a big one. If we don't know what our role is, we can begin to be seen as deal inhibitors. And if you get to that point, it really is a death knell for your organization. You really, it's hard to pull yourself out of that without doing pretty much everything that we've just talked about, which would be very hard. Avoid channel conflict with partners where possible. As we said, the whole concept of partners shifts when you're an ESO. So you've got to try and avoid becoming in conflict with them. You've got to find a way to work with them rather than against them. And some conflict is okay. I mean, there's just a natural conflict that's going to occur if you're going to compete for the same business. But I've got to say, in every organization I've worked on, I've really tried hard to find a way to help my partners accentuate their business and be quality assurance for their implementations rather than compete against them all the time. Another thing to look at is, the inadequate investment in quality infrastructure and implementation methods. We didn't talk about much about the use of the collective wisdom. Failure to invest in that and the system to collect it holds your organization back, and it really does hamper your ability to mature as an organization. And I teach this within the trainings, but any organization that doesn't collect its IP and find a way to use it, reuse it, is essentially holding itself back, and will, in a competitive market, it will always be the company that finds a way to commoditize and reuse its intellectual property that's going to win. And so I really do kind of, again, a pitfall is just not doing that. The final one is really just recruitment and attention of consulting staff, and really focusing on making sure that you can develop longer tenure. And knowing exactly what the average tenure of your organization is a great asset. You really do need to know that, because if it's decreasing, then you have a problem. You cannot scale into an expanding market if your average tenure is decreasing, because you don't have enough senior people to help your customers be successful with your product. So that's really it for today. I want to quickly just recap everything that we've looked at to give you maybe 5 ideas of places where you could look to see if you can take action after today. The first is, how does your company, customer and organization, or your PSO maturity or ESO maturity affect your mission? Do you really know that, right? Have you looked at where you are in each of those maturity cycles, and are they impacting your mission? Remember, I'm not coming at this from a perspective of I have ever done all of this perfectly. So I can guarantee you, in every job that I've ever had, if I took the time aside to really look at these 3 things, I would always identify something that I was missing. I would always identify something else that I could be doing. Number 2 would be determine how to become the expert, right? Are you truly bringing your expertise to the forefront during the pre-sale cycle, during your implementations, and then in a way that helps you create a better and ongoing, more mature service for your customers? Make sure that you align your product offerings or your service offerings with your people path. What can you do to grow your relationship with sales? Like, is it the best that it can be? And I think for all of us, there's always work that we can do there. Also, then, how can you use the data that you've already got to empower actions in the field? Or what things do you want to do in order to get certain data into the hands of your consultants and your project managers? And to begin to look at those strategies and the benefits that you might get from doing them. So that's really it. I do appreciate everybody's time today. Mark and I, we work very closely together. Mark is a huge proponent of really kind of looking at the best practices within the consulting firm, and that's why he and the other guys started up Kimball. I've been very lucky to be working with these guys for the last 6 months, and really enjoyed it, because they really are looking at ways to incorporate into the software product the best practices that we want to execute as executives in the field. So if you have any questions, please let us know. We're always eager to help. The first question I have here is, I am in a recently established PS organization in a ferociously sales-led software environment. I want to stop sales chucking requirements over the wall and dashing onto the next thing. Where do I start? So this can be really difficult, right? You're trying to turn the tide of an entire team, and that can be hard to do. So where I would start is sitting down with the head of sales, making sure that he's aware of what you add to the sales cycle, but also, more importantly, that you have a set of key points that you've discussed with your chief financial officer as to where this approach is leaving you with respect to happy and paying customers. And one of the things I talked to an executive recently about this, and I said, look, if this is happening, then the impact of that has to be coming up somewhere. Your job as a services executive is to find exactly where this strategy is having an impact on your business. And it could be customers leaving before they go live. It could be in your own services team that won't stay around long enough because they're sick and tired of working on these projects. It could be customer confidence or customer satisfaction. And so you need to find within the org where this approach is having its toll. And then you basically just need to confront the head of sales with that and have the conversation. But in doing it, you need to make sure that you're offering, hey, this is what I'm bringing to the table. I want you to be more successful on the sales side, so I'm willing to put people in front of customers. I'm going to train them on how to do that, and we're going to help you close deals. But in doing that, I need this in return because you're making it almost impossible for me to get long tenure. You're making it impossible for me to make my numbers because I'm losing so much time and effort in escalations, or you're just making it hard for us to even just get customers live. So I think that's really where we need to start.
How early in the software sales cycle would you recommend potential implementation resource demands is flagged to the consulting team?
My experience is that generally, back to what you were saying earlier about that link between the salespeople and the people implementing, is often it is at the point of winning a piece of business, then it's where the consulting team come in. And often when we talk to people, they talk a lot about how they need systems and so on to improve how they manage their resources. But what they don't do is to address the real fundamental problem, which is you need to change the culture, whether that's through software or just simply through process, which says the earlier you can in the process that salespeople are flagging the potential demand for resource needs, the earlier the person running the consulting team can actually start to plan for that. Even if those deals don't become real projects, start to feel a cadence to the demand that's coming out there, and you can make a difference. So I would say as early as possible. And that takes a lot because software sales guys typically don't want to put information in the system, but you have to start to change that to get them to realise the impact they're having downstream. And that allows the consulting team to provide a better service.
What advice would you give about when you should start using implementation partners?
That's the question I get asked quite a lot from people, because I think the temptation, as Shane said, in that that sort of 4 steps of maturity of where you are as a services arm of a technology business means that probably at the beginning you're really doing all those implementations yourself. You've got to be very close to the product, making sure that any issues to the product are smoothed over by the services team. And then I think what people make the mistake of is they wait too long in their immaturity to then bring implementation partners. And also the types of implementation partners I'd add are quite important. Often people want to go to the very large software vendors. But when your product's relatively new to market, you're not really going to get those people interested if they can't get 100, 200 people out billing. So it's actually early on finding good implementation partners and working with them closely. And I would say pretty much probably the second stage in the maturity cycle that Shane was showing is when you really should start to look after partners in the field, and typically look for partners who are relatively small and hungry, where implementing your software is going to be a big important part of their business and leveraging their own margin. Rather than a very, very large implementation partner where your software will not actually be implemented, that will not be that important to you.
And I think there's an important area here that I probably learned the hard way, but has really kind of altered the way I look at partners, is that it works much better when you, as the professional services group inside the product company, sell yourselves as the experts and charge a higher rate than your partners do. Because otherwise what happens is that you begin to compete with partners on price. And what partners hate is when the vendor's services organization comes in and undercuts their bid. And it's very hard to create a thriving partner ecosystem in that environment. And so what I've always done is, and of course it serves us better as a professional services organization, which is to really leverage our expertise and really charge higher rates for that expertise than our partners do. And then that makes partners the cheaper option for customers, but then it makes us the kind of more expensive top shelf option, which is also good for our own P&L.
Salespeople are selling products and then engaging professional services from a technology perspective into industries that are being disrupted. And you've described and touched, I think, upon a lot of these environments that in the presentation and also in the Q&A. But from a supply side, in this field where we hear about the productization of services, and we also hear about products themselves being overlaid with a service proposition. Just describe the type of conversation and how do you find a common language between the professional services people and the sales people that are selling into, as I say, these disrupted industries?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one thing that you need to do as a services organization is openly embrace a thing called the commoditization of our own services, right? And sometimes we think that we're a little bit safe because we're kind of information workers, that we don't have the impacts of commoditization as much as, say, product companies do, right? I mean, products get commoditized all the time. You know, cameras are being commoditized, phones are being commoditized, everything gets commoditized. We have to focus and openly kind of admit, and I've kind of walked into trouble with this once or twice with the organization not truly understanding what I'm aiming at doing, but I've walked in and said, guys, we're going to put ourselves as services out of a job. I mean, we're going to commoditize the service we provide today because that's not the same service we're going to provide tomorrow, nor is it what our customers want to pay for. And if you think about it from a competitive standpoint, any company that can openly commoditize its own service offering and layer that into the product or find a cheaper way to deliver it to the customer so that customers can still get the same benefit will take a competitive advantage. And I think that's how you have the conversation with sales. There is this kind of concept of the commoditization of services that we need to look at and really kind of openly say, I am not going to be delivering the same service that I'm delivering today in 5 years' time. I'm going to help these markets and industries that are being disrupted get a handle on that disruption, to make it cheaper for them to run and operate their business to a point that it kind of gets over the disruption. But I'm also going to focus on pushing my team into the area of expertise beyond this initial wave. I hope that answers the question, but it's a very good question, and it probably requires a lot more time to answer it, but I hope that gives you an idea of where to start.
It does. Thank you very much indeed, Shane. So we've reached our hour on this fascinating webinar, so it really just remains for me to thank Shane and Mark for some great presentations, so really fantastic insights into what's happening in the professional services world and how it engages with the product world. To thank Kimball Applications for sponsoring this session. To the attendees, thank you very much indeed for your valuable time. We do appreciate it, and have a great day.